During the Enlightenment, François-Marie Aurault, better known by his pseudonym Voltaire, used his works to advocate for the government's responsibility in protecting the rights of citizens. He influenced governments and citizens alike, continuing after his death to impact revolutions, governments, and politicians around the world. François-Marie Aurault was born to an aristocratic family on November 21, 1694. He frequently rebelled and became a writer, much to the dismay of his father, who wanted him to pursue a legal career. His rebellious personality led his parents to nickname him Le Petit Volontaire, meaning determined little thing. He later adapted his nickname and took on the pen name Voltaire in 1718 after becoming known as the wit of Persian society due to his essays and historical studies, many of which were inspired by his experiences growing up in the oppressive reign of King Louis XIV. His experiences attending a Jesuit school led to an interest in religion. After frequenting lectures on philosophers, he advocated for deism, a religion popular during the Enlightenment that allowed a belief in God and science while not contradicting the Bible.
God as first cause. He initiates the spark that starts the universe, but then what happens to you and me on a daily basis, that's up to you, baby, okay? He doesn't have anything to do with that at all. That's deism, right? And so God is watchmaker. He builds the perfect watch, he winds it up, and he lets it go, and then the rest of humanity is up to you.
1726 was a turning point for Voltaire. After his rival had him imprisoned out of jealousy, Voltaire requested to serve the remaining sentence in self-exile in England. The next 2 years are considered the most impactful in developing his philosophies. He was exposed to the works of William Shakespeare, John Locke, and Isaac Newton. They exposed him to ideas of social contract, freedom of speech, science, and the arts. Voltaire wanted to publish his interpretations of what he learned in England. In order to fund his works, Voltaire found a loophole in the French lottery system and amassed the equivalent of $6.1 million. Writers at the time funded their works through aristocrats and the church and censored their works to satisfy them. But Voltaire could now self-fund and publish his works. For the rest of his life, Voltaire used these works to advocate for several rights and responsibilities, including the responsibility of the government to protect the rights of its citizens. One of his most famous works regarding the responsibilities of governments to their citizens was the Letters Philosophiques, also known as the Letters on the English. Written in 1734, it focused on the superiority of England's political system and praised the individual rights born from the English Civil War and Bill of Rights. Highlighting how the English system protected its citizens, he argued for rights of citizens such as freedom of speech, saying, "Every man has the liberty of publishing his thoughts with regard to public affairs." The book was a bestseller in England. By praising the English, he indirectly attacked absolutists and criticized their rule, particularly the French government. He argued for them to take on the responsibility of providing citizens with basic rights and to move from absolute rule towards democracy. He praised events of the English and scorned those of the French, including the comparison that the civil wars of France lasted longer, were more cruel, and produced greater evils than those of England. These jabs at the French monarch led to the book being banned in France, confiscated books being burned, and a warrant was issued for Voltaire's arrest. Punishments became so severe that people no longer wanted to read his works, and he began publishing them under new names in different countries to spread his views. Critics of Voltaire's work included Dutch Huguenot David Boyer, whose memoir against Voltaire is prefaced by saying, "Monsieur de Voltaire is rather unsparing in the following pieces, but I do not know if a writer who himself shows so little respect for the most respectable people and for the most sacred things should have legitimately expected that much would be preserved for him." His works reached politicians abroad, such as Frederick the Great of Prussia. Voltaire was invited to live in his court and provided Frederick with advice. Their interactions made Frederick a more liberal ruler and changed his views on the responsibilities of government. He began to adopt reforms in the judicial system and expanded rights such as the freedom of speech, press, religion, and literature, and allowing commoners in the bureaucracy. At one point he even stated, "A prince is only the first servant of the state." Critics argued that Voltaire had brought English influence into the country, and Frederick's own nephew Wilhelm II referred to his uncle as a weak, cowardly man controlled by his British wife. Although Voltaire advocated for the responsibility of governments to protect many rights of their citizens, one was his biggest focus, the right to freedom of religion. The writings surrounding this became some of his most controversial works, directly challenging the Catholic Church and restrictions of freedoms by governments. Voltaire's most controversial work was a satirical book called Candide. Written in 1758, the book very clearly attacked the Catholic Church and absolutist governments across Europe for their cruelness and strict following of religion. religion. Referring to the corruption of the Catholic Church, a character states, "The Jesuits are masters of everything, and the people have no money at all." Voltaire used satire to highlight religious fanaticism, intolerance, and hypocrisy of governments. It called out Spanish authorities for violating basic rights of citizens. The Spanish took offense at Voltaire's criticism, as it was attacking their legitimacy and the morality of their actions. The Spanish Council of Castile banned the book, concluding, "Having news that several books have been scattered and promoted in these kingdoms, destroying in this way the political and social order, the reading of 39 French works is prohibited under fine." Candide also angered both the church and Enlightenment philosophers when it referenced the Lisbon earthquake, which killed 30,000 people. Catholics argued the deaths were God's way of punishing the wicked. Voltaire disagreed, stating, "Seeing this mass of victims, will you say God is avenged? Their death is the price of their crimes. Did fallen Lisbon indulge in more vices than London or Paris, which live in pleasure?" French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau saw Voltaire's reasoning as inhumane and lacking emotion. Writing to Voltaire in a letter, "I expected from your poem on the disaster of Lisbon some results more worthy of the humanity which appears to have inspired you to write it." The two philosophers continued to disagree throughout their lifetime, and Voltaire's library included 24 of Rousseau's works filled with critiques. Throughout his life, Voltaire had experienced firsthand how the criminal justice system had hurt those with differing beliefs. He began to clear the names of those wrongly persecuted in crimes related to religion. The most famous example was that of John Calais. Calais' son had been persecuted for being Protestant, and after intense pressure to convert to Catholicism, he committed suicide. Calais was wrongly accused of killing his son to prevent him from converting, and was sentenced to questioning by torture, including pulling limbs and broken on the wheel. Hours of torture went by, and after one last attempt at confession, he said, "I die innocent," and was strangled and burned. In response to Calais' death, Voltaire wrote the Treatise on Tolerance in 1763. Focusing on religious freedom, he said, "I say that we should regard all men as our brothers." What? The Turk, my brother? The Chinaman, my brother? The Jew, the Siam? Yes, without a doubt. Are we not all children of the same Father and creatures of the same God? After writing this book, he campaigned for a pardon from King Louis XV, and Calais' name was cleared in 1765. Voltaire died at 83 on May 30th, 1778. His final words were, "Now is not the time for making new enemies," in response to a priest urging him to renounce Satan. His criticism of the Catholic Church resulted in the denial of a Christian burial, and the Church denounced Voltaire after his death, saying he had been punished by dying in agony and the fear of hell. Voltaire's impact on the responsibility of governments and protections for the rights of citizens extended well beyond his lifetime, including his impact on the French Revolution.
The French Revolution really has its roots back with Louis XIV. In my humble opinion, Louis XIV blew tons of money, never saw a war he didn't like, knew that he had to completely fortify France. If you travel around France today, you'll see all these grand citadels that he had built up that were extremely expensive. You know, he fought wars to try to conquer the Netherlands, he fought wars all over the place in France, and all of that was super duper expensive.
11 years after Voltaire's death, French citizens began the French Revolution to fix the economic problems caused by the king and get rid of the monarchy. Although several of Voltaire's works impacted the French Revolution, the greatest was Candide. Excerpts such as "One must cultivate one's own garden" inspired revolutionaries to cultivate their future and not accept the present situation. His philosophies against absolutism and for the establishment of religious tolerance as a basic human right inspired these same philosophies to be ensured in the Estates General, the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, and the granting of complete religious freedom in the 1792 French Constitution. His influence also expanded to the United States, as founding fathers were inspired by his work. When Benjamin Franklin visited Voltaire at his deathbed, Voltaire extended his hand and stated, "Liberty and justice." Another founding father, Thomas Jefferson, was an avid reader of Voltaire's works and recognized the government's responsibility to protect the rights of the people. Jefferson and other anti-federalists successfully adapted Voltaire's views on freedom of religion into the First Amendment of the Constitution. Voltaire's bust can still be found at Jefferson's home in Monticello. In modern times, Voltaire's words have continued to inspire French leaders, such as in 1968 when President Charles de Gaulle stated, "One does not arrest Voltaire," when advocating for the pardon of a French protester. Current French President Macron once stated, "I say that to be French is to defend the right to laugh, jest, mock, and caricature, of which Voltaire maintained that it is the source of all other rights." Voltaire embodied 18th century philosophy and implored governments of Europe to recognize their responsibility to ensure and protect the rights of their citizens. His works of the 18th century helped lay the groundwork for modern politics. The very world we live in would be unrecognizable without him, the young, rebellious aristocrat who chose his own path in life.